All right, that is it. We did it. First things first. The bottom center of the screen says that we've beaten 21 games in 2024 and 468 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are now false. We've now beaten 22 games in 2024 and 469 since we started doing this in 2020. Let's go. All right. Yeah, so I think I have some pros and cons here. Let's talk about Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Let's start with the good, and there is a lot of good. I think this game is a lot more polished than the original trilogy, Metal Gear Solid trilogy. I know that some of those games, I realize I have friends. I know a lot of people who, like, those are their favorite fucking games, right? So I realize I'm talking about a beloved franchise here. And that I should be careful with my wording, and that's fine. I'm going to do that. But I appreciate this game for its objective value a lot more than I personally appreciate it for my personal enjoyment. Let's just say that. I recognize that these games are very objectively good, but they're not exactly my kind of games. I struggled quite a bit with the original trilogy, quite a bit. There were parts of 1, 2, and 3 that I freaking hated because I was just struggling with the controls. I couldn't. There was always this issue with it being very clear that stealth was the way to go, but stealth seeming like it was impossible. Like, I just kept setting off alerts and yada yada. But with Metal Gear Solid 4, there was a change there. The game, one way you could look at it is that the game got a lot easier, but I think for me, what it more boils down to is that the game's controls got a lot better. The mission parameters were much more clear. And the situations where stealth was all but required or required outright were more reasonable. I thought, and you know, the story's always been bonkers. And they 1, 2, 3, and 4, I thought they got more and more bonkers. And so I thought Metal Gear Solid 4 was my favorite up to this point. Because not only did it have the most bonkers story, which is debatable, but I thought it was a pretty crazy story. But I also thought it had the best controls and the best gameplay. So I thought it had, you know, maybe not the best story. The Metal Gear Solid 3 story is great. Metal Gear Solid 2 story is great. Metal Gear Solid 1 is pretty good. They're all great stories, but I just really liked how crazy the 4 story was. But also I just really enjoyed playing it. However, with Metal Gear Solid 4, even with the gameplay being better, what my big key takeaway with Metal Gear Solid 4 was that the gameplay is still second fiddle to the story and the cutscenes. My most fun I'm having playing Metal Gear, any of the Metal Gear Solid games, is when I'm just sitting back watching cutscenes and some crazy shit's happening. So it's almost like I'm watching a movie at those times. It's like, if my favorite part of a game isn't the gameplay, then what are we even doing, you know? So it's always kind of made me question, like, how much do I really like the gameplay? And I think at this point in the franchise with Peace Walker, that's changed a little bit. I would say that for 2 reasons. Number one, I think the gameplay gets better and better. I think the actual gameplay, like controls, are better in this game than they've ever been. But I also think it's a lot more reasonable with the stealth stuff and things like that. But I have to say, I don't think that the story was as good. So I liked the gameplay the best in this game, which is good because I thought the gameplay was better than it's ever been. But the story wasn't as cool to me. It was still cool. It was still, I mean, by any other game standards, the story was still pretty crazy, but it's not nearly as crazy to me as 4. The story's pretty straightforward in Peace Walker. It's not that hard to understand, which is a first for me. So because of that, my favorite part wasn't the cutscenes because it was a lot more straightforward, and so I enjoyed the gameplay the most. Not that it was that much better than 4, but it was a lot better than the cutscenes because I didn't think the story was quite as compelling. So I did think the gameplay was better than it's ever been. I thought the story was less crazy than it's ever been. And then beyond that, the only other main thing is that the mission structure is the structure of the game is very different here. It's based on, it reminds me a lot of the difference between Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect is kind of sandboxy, kind of do whatever, play the game, and, it's kind of all runs together. And that's how 1, 2, 3, and 4 Metal Gear Solid were too. They just kind of, it was hard for me to see like, okay, I should stop the video here and then start another video here, because there's no chapters, there's no mission list really. You're just playing the game until the game ends, right? This game is it's all partitioned off, very divided up by mission, like Mass Effect 2 is. And I loved that about Mass Effect 2, and I love it about this game. I like having structure. Structure makes me happy. It not only does it help me to figure out how to divide up my videos and stuff, but it also just is satisfying for me. I just like that checking the box, mission complete kind of a structure. So I thought that was a welcome addition. However, I also, on the same side of that coin, along with the mission structure, there was a lot of extra stuff like taking care of your base and building a mech, and you're doing you have these extra ops that you can do if you want to, these optional missions, and you've got, you got to manage your food and your intel and all that stuff. It's almost like a sim game on that part between missions. And you've got to, if you want to get a better rocket launcher, you have to develop it by putting resources on that team and yada yada. And that was all very cool, and none of it's objectively bad. But for my preference, it's a distraction. I don't really care so much for the distraction, which isn't a problem normally, because I can just say there are lots of things in games that I don't like that I have the option to ignore, right? And in side missions, stuff like that, I can just like, okay, well, if I want to get into it's like in Fallout 4, I never built a base because I never had to. It's something that's there if you want it, and if you don't want it, just leave it behind. And so until close to the end of the game, that's what that was for me. It was like, this is an extra thing. I think I did one side mission before the end, and it was like, okay, that was fine. That's cool that's there. I kind of like this allocation of resources thing that you're doing with your group. So that's fine. It didn't bother me. It's not points taken away just because it's something I wouldn't like, because the game isn't forcing me to do it until the end. So let's talk about the end. So I beat Chapter 4. I beat Peace Walker. All that stuff is done, right? And then, how can I talk about this without being spoilery? Well, it's not really a spoiler to say that these things are there, right? The credits roll. Full-on credits. It is a definitive ending. There is a definitive ending to the story. As far as I'm concerned, the game is over. And then after the credits, there's this like, to be continued in Chapter 5. Oh no, what's this? Is this DLC? Is this some optional stuff beyond the credits that requires me to repeat a lot of stuff? And this is, I'm not going to get all into it here, but I have a very specific system that I have worked out over the years in order to tell when a game is beaten, right? And the main way is my main tentpole is, when is the core experience over? 98% of the time, that's when the credits roll, right? But not always. There are some situations where A, the credits don't roll at all, or B, they do roll, but it's at a point where it's clear that the core experience has not ended. Like it's a joke, or it's a fake out, or something like this. So I took some time to read up on what was required to move forward, and it did not look like I had to do much extra optional stuff. Let me repeat that. Let me rephrase that. It did not look like I had to repeat much content. I did have to go back and beat another boss once, which I did, and it was easy. It was fine. And I started doing this extra missions, because it's like, okay, if I'm not repeating content, and this is another parameter, a clear path to victory. I need to be able to understand what I need to do. If it's some amorphous thing where it's like, well, you know, just keep playing and enjoying the game until at some point you'll unlock it. If you keep playing, I don't play that shit because that's just not how I play video games. And you know what? If you don't like that, that's fine. I respect your journey, but I need people to respect mine too. That I don't enjoy that. It is not fun for me. In fact, as I was playing, I played like 10 extra ops missions. I eventually got Zadornov. I got the thing to trigger so I could continue to play. And then at a certain point, there was more that I had to do. I looked it up online. It was not clear what I had to do. I didn't understand what I had to do. It looked like I was going to have to play every extra mission. It looked like I was going to have to just keep playing and keep building your base and yada yada. And you got to get certain research. So it became clear that I was going to have to replay. I was going to have to do every side mission, which, I'm sorry, that's not the core experience. And I was probably going to have to replay a significant number of main story missions. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm done. That's not core experience to me. So as far as I'm concerned, I have beaten the game. I got credits. I got a definitive ending. I didn't see all the content. I never do. I didn't see the true ending. I rarely do. I can sleep at night saying I beat Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. But the point of all that to say when it comes to reviewing it is I hate that shit. And it drives me fucking nuts. I respect it from a gameplay building perspective. I do. But I am one of those people, and I don't hate on people that don't feel this way. But for me, a single player game that I'm going to enjoy has a very clear beginning, middle, and end. And lately, I don't mind live service stuff or whatever, you know, some of these new things. I don't mind them. Some of them I quite like, actually. But when you're doing that thing where it's like either the game never really ends or, yeah, it ends, but you got to go through it 3 more times before you unlock the true ending. I just don't like that shit. It's not fun for me to do that. I don't enjoy replaying content. And I really don't enjoy being forced to play optional content because then it's not fucking optional, is it? Anyway, so I just on my personal enjoyment level, that took a pretty big hit. I feel like I was deprived of the rest of the content in the game, which is very little apparently. You just have to. Well, I won't go over it in here, but shit, it just left a really sour taste in my mouth. So that is going to affect it. At the end of the day, I liked this game more than 1, 2, and 3 anyway, because I really struggled through those games, and I didn't struggle that much through this game. And I did really enjoy it, and the boss fights were really fun, and that's a big part of it for me. But I didn't like it as much as 4. I thought the story in 4 was way cooler. I got a very clear ending in 4, and the gameplay is pretty good in 4. Maybe not quite as good as this game, but the whole package, I think Metal Gear Solid 4 is still my favorite. So it's going to rank somewhere between this and I think 3 is the next ranked one. But I did enjoy it. I just don't like the way that it ended or didn't end or whatever. Alright, that's it. Last order of business. What we would normally do at this point is we'd say, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, it's been fun, but we're now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. But this is actually a disc, which is almost never true for me, but I'm playing this on a PS3. So what we'll say instead is, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, it's been fun, but we are now going to eject you from your disc, or eject your disc from the console, put you back into your case, and never play you again. Thank you for being a good time. That really goes for this whole collection.